Today, my guest is Max Lucado.
So I would think that our population is more fear-based now than it is faith-based.
Savior, live your faith and pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today, my guest is Max Lucado. Now, he is known as a preacher with a storyteller's gift, a pastor's heart, and a poet's pen. And I'm sure most of you have read at least one book by him. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great treat.
Yeah, it's a great treat for us, too. He has a new book called You'll Get Through This, Hope and Help for Your Turbulent Times. And it is a wonderful book. It's already helped me. Do you think there are more people having hard times now than at other times?
Well, I do, and I think there are a variety of reasons. Number one, it's just a tough time in which we live. We are so affected by things that happen all the way around the planet. Mm-hmm. You know, our economy, if it's almost like if Japan sneezes, we feel it in St. Augustine,
That's
Florida,
true.
right? I mean, because we're so tightly connected. And number two, we see things that we used to never know about because of the rapid expansion of the news media. Mm-hmm. You know, it could be that an earthquake would happen in Australia 500 years ago, and if you live in South America, you'd never know about it. But now you're aware of everything that's happening around the world. That increases a level of anxiety, mm-hmm. a level of fear on the planet. So I would think that our population is more fear-based now than it is faith-based. And that's a whole different way to view life.
Are you seeing that among Christians too?
Yes. What I'm seeing among Christians is a different type of fear. And that is that Christians tend to slide into the kind of the formal term of it is legalism. I like the phrase performanceism. If I perform well, God's going to love me. We tend to understand that phrase better. Mm-hmm. So we create our own brand of fear. Mm-hmm. You know, we let God save us, but then instead of living in the peace of that salvation, we tend to say, okay, now it's up to me to stay saved. And so we created a different kind of fear. I wrote about that in my last book.
And what is that book
That one
called?
was called Grace.
Grace.
And this book is dealing with helping people who find themselves just in that sudden moment of anxiety. Mm-hmm. When the diagnosis comes, or when the car wreck comes, or when the divorce comes, mm-hmm. we need some truth to speak into our hearts right at that moment. Otherwise, we'll spiral down into a pit, and some people never escape.
Yeah. Well, I know that you use the story of Joseph
mm-hmm.
in this book.
Speaking of pits, right?
Yeah, speaking of pits. So, what made you decide to use that
Well,
story?
he is the classic case of a
mm-hmm.
person where everything turned against him. Mm-hmm. It's a phenomenal story. You know, he's not guiltless. You know, when you start reading the story, he was a cocky kid, you know. Yeah. But he didn't deserve what his brothers did. They threw him in a pit, sold him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt, spending 10 years working in a foreign country. Does his best, gets propositioned by the boss's wife, resists mm-hmm. the temptation, gets thrown in prison. I mean, it's one thing after another. Poor guy.
Yeah.
Even later on, you know, in his life when he's reconciled with his brothers, he's still trying to figure it all out. And I love this. I think the story of Joseph is so loved because mm-hmm. it's a story of somebody, though mistreated and faced so many challenges, he never gave up. Mm-hmm. He didn't give up. He didn't get bitter. He never let his heart metastasize into hatred. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, how did he hang on? And he gives us the answer. You know, the key verse and the punchline is Genesis 50:20. It's just the greatest verse, and when it comes to suffering in the Bible, he tells his brothers, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good.
Right.
So there it is. There's the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Deep in his heart was this conviction of there's evil in this world, but God can take that evil and reroute it into something good. He uses the same word, you meant, and it comes from a word which means weave. So you wove evil But God took those tapestries of evil and he rewove them into something good that literally saved Joseph's family or Jacob's family, which in essence, consequently, saved the lineage of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So now looking back, we say, oh, okay, that wasn't Egypt, that was protective custody. God was lifting the nation of Israel and placing them in a safe place where he could protect them. And now we get it. So I don't want to take up the whole time, but
I like that, protective custody.
Yeah,
That's good.
And the message of Joseph is the message God gives to anybody who's struggling. And we all go through tough times. And that is, God will get you through this. He will. There's a purpose in this. We don't always know where it comes from. We can't quickly say why God permits it. But we can say God's still on the throne. So, my message in this book is don't give up. Don't do something stupid that makes it even worse, which we're candidates to do. And so I'm just trying to help people get through that tough season.
Romans 8:28, a lot of people will quote, but they a lot of times don't go on to 8:29, which says the purpose of, where it says God works all things together for good. The purpose is to make us more like Christ. And wasn't he doing that with Joseph too?
What a great observation. You can look back, in fact, one of the chapters I look back and I say, here's God's goal for Joseph, is to turn him into a capable leader where he can shepherd the civilized world, the then civilized world, through a time of famine. So what does he need? Well, then you begin looking back and say, okay, that some time working for an Egyptian official would be helpful, some time in charge of a prison, leading the most difficult people to lead, that might be helpful. Even some time in a foreign country where he grew up in Canaan, because he's going to be taking care of people from all over the world, so he's an international. So all of these things came in handy when he was the prince of Egypt. We learn the same thing, don't we?
Oh, yes.
At the end of our life, we look back, okay, now I see why, what I learned when I had that broken leg. Now I know what it's like to get dismissed from a job, or I know what it's like to go through this, and all of it works together for something good.
And then the comfort he gives us, he uses
Absolutely.
through us to comfort others.
He does.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you said God not only wants your whole heart, he wants your heart whole. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a good sentence, isn't it?
Yeah, good job.
I just heard that. Yeah, that works. That was in the context of Joseph's family, which I think is so fascinating. We live in a day of dysfunctional families. That's really a buzzword, right? But it's true. And as a pastor, when I talk to people and try to help them with their issues or challenges, inevitably it comes back to that dad who wasn't at home, or that mom who wasn't there, or that uncle, or that granddad. We inherit this junk from our families. And Joseph, oh my goodness.
Yeah, he sure had it.
Oh, you've got 10 brothers who want to kill you. You've got a dad who pampers you, but then never shows up. That's one of the things I wondered. Well, where he's such an absentee guy all these years. So he's got all of this junk, all of this baggage. And so I dedicated some time in the book to talking about trying to invite Jesus to come in and heal the ancient hurts of your life that have come through poor parenting or through even abuse. I really believe that Jesus can do that.
Oh, yes.
And so when I say he wants not just your whole heart, he wants your heart whole. He wants it to all be healed. And so I think part of getting through the challenge is dealing with your past in the presence of Christ and asking him to come and speak to those moments of pain and hurt so that you won't be bound up in the past and you can move forward.
Right. Well, everybody, it seems, who doesn't know Christ always asks that question, what about evil in the world? How can I believe in a God who allows this kind of stuff to happen? What's your answer to that question?
Well, just about all of our faith issues come from unmet expectations. We say, if there is a God, then blank. And it's not just unbelievers, believers too. I do it. It's a real common logic, common thought process.
Right.
If there is a God, he's going to be like this. But stop and think about that. Who am I to tell God who to be?
That's true.
If there is a God, then who am I to define him?
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly what we do. So what we're saying is, if there is a God, he's going to be this kind of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of, and he didn't do it, so I don't believe in that. And so a person who doesn't believe in God really doesn't believe in the God that they have defined. See?
Good point.
And God's response to that, I think, through Scripture is, well, it's not up to you to tell me who I am.
Yeah. My ways are not your ways.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't come down hard on unbelievers on this, because I do this.
Mm-hmm.
I do this. If God is God, then all of my kids are going to have happy marriages. I'm going to have a bunch of grandkids. We're going to all grow happy and old together. Well, maybe that will be maybe that'll happen. But there's no promise. There's no guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
The Scripture says in this world you will have tribulation.
That is a promise.
That's a promise, isn't it? So really, most faith crises of faith are dealt with by tracing them back to that unmet expectation,
Mm-hmm.
and helping the person see, this is just your own expectation of God. And maybe it's a fair expectation. Maybe it's just your expectation. But you've got to let God be God.
That's true. How does knowing God's character help somebody in a time of crisis?
One of the most interesting things that I came across in researching this book was a story of J.J. Jasper.
Yes.
We
interviewed him.
Did you?
Yes.
What a story, huh?
Tragic.
It's tragic.
It was hard to understand how he got through that day.
Yeah.
When his, for viewers who don't know, his son was killed in a freak accident on a little
dune buggy.
Yes, and he was his only son.
And yes, how did he get through that day? That's why I wanted to talk to him. I talked to people who got through things.
Mm-hmm.
He said many things that were helpful, and he described how he had to call then his other children. If I remember correctly, like the older kids were away at a summer camp, and he had to call them on the phone and tell them that their little brother didn't survive. And I said, well, how'd you do that? He said, when they got on the phone, I said, I'm about to tell you some very difficult news, but I want you to think about some things about God you know to be true, and hold on to them.
Wow.
I think that's a key. When we're going through changing times, you got to hold on to God's unchanging character. I made a list of things that I believe about God, and I keep it with me. Things like God is always on the throne. God still forgives sinners. God still sends angels to help those who serve him. God uses every crisis for my ultimate good and his ultimate glory. Just a list of things that reflect his character. So that when I go through a tough time, I can pull that out and say, okay, this hasn't changed. This has not changed. And I think that's an essential tool for getting through a tough time.
Definitely. And like you were mentioning before, anytime I've been through something like that, I can always eventually look back and say, I would rather be where I am now in my relationship with the Lord than be where I was before I went through this.
Mm-hmm.
So there is value in suffering.
There is. It's
Definitely.
not fun.
No.
Not fun.
Not at all. Well, how do people define themselves by the catastrophes, and why do you think they do that?
Our tendency is to, instead of saying I'm going through a divorce, to say I am the divorcee. Or I was fired, they conclude I am the unemployed. Or I was neglected by my parents, and they conclude I'm not worth being parenting. All of us go through difficult times, but we don't have to let that crisis become our definition. Again, we've got to interrupt it with truth. We've got to interrupt it. When we're going through a difficult time, we tend to take on that time, that event, as our personality. And we become the widower or the widow. And again, with great compassion, acknowledging it's so tough. But you got to hold on to truth during those tough times and realize that you have not become the crisis. You've just gone through the crisis. You're not identified by the crisis. You're still God's child. You're still bought and cleansed by the blood of Christ. You're still destined for heaven. My question for people when they go through tough times is, what do you still have that no one can take? What do you still have that no one can take? Because when you're going through a crisis, the tendency is to think, oh, I've lost it all.
No, you
I've
still
lost
have
it all.
Jesus.
Yeah. You know, I remember when I was a teenager, I should have put this in the book, but I didn't. But I can remember what I thought was such a crisis. And it was a big blemish on my face on the day of the high school prom. I mean, it was a pimple, you know. I look back, I just laugh. I think, why did I make? I was so concerned. I went to my mom. I said, can you put some makeup on this? What do I do? It's going to look terrible. We're having pictures taken. She's going to be embarrassed to be seen with me. I'll probably get kicked out of school. I'll probably have to move to Antarctica. You know, you just go wild in your thought process. Right. Now, of course, now looking back, I say, you know, that's just a pimple on my cheek. Why was I so freaked out? Do you think when we're in heaven, we'll look back on what today are very legitimate concerns, health diagnoses, financial crises, but maybe we'll say, you know, that all of those were nothing more than a pimple on the cheek. It seems bad now. It seems bad now, but we've got to keep it in perspective. Right. That God uses all of these things for His cause and ultimate good.
Sometimes I think if we could just get that heavenly perspective, you know, keep in mind what God thinks and what God has told us, instead of you know, what we're seeing down here. It's almost like getting up in an airplane and you're up above the clouds over a storm and stuff, and you can see more clearly what's going on.
It means everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It means everything. I don't know how you get through life without the promise of heaven.
I don't either.
You know.
I don't either.
And maybe that's it. Maybe you don't.
Yeah. Maybe you don't. That's why everybody needs Jesus, besides the fact that they need Him for salvation.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I wish we had more time. You are an amazing guest, and I really thank you for taking time to spend
It's my
time
privilege.
with us. Where can people find you online? MaxLucado.com?
MaxLucado.com.
All right.
Yeah.
And again, the book is You'll Get Through This, and you will, with the help of the Lord. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
You too.
Stand for